Hi, in this video I'll show you how to create a drop-down list that doesn't show selected items over again. So this is an idea I got out of a blog post from Debra Dalgleish. She has a great website called Contextures, and you can just Google her name in Contextures and you can find a lot of great Excel resources. And this tip is from a blog post that she did quite some time ago. So let's say, for example, you wanted to create a drop-down list and you want to have selected items, but after you select one for one row, you don't want it to repeat for another row. Like maybe this is something that you're doing for a seating plan. Let's say we just put Suresh in table A, Gil in table A, Yang and Lily in table B, and then John all by himself in table C. Right? So we want to do something like this, and we don't have the benefit of creating this kind of visual here, but we just have a drop down. So we want to do something like, okay, Suresh is in table A, and also Gil is in table A. Now you notice that Suresh's name is gone here, right? And once I select Gil, now you notice there's only 3 people left. Yang and Lily, and of course when I get to the last choice here, we have John. So there is a neat way to do this. About 5 steps here. And first is setting up the table, then creating the item list, and figuring out that if the name has been used, creating a list of unused names, and then creating the drop-down list, right? So we're going to set up the table. So this is basically the table that we set up, right? Let's delete everything here, and I'm going to get rid of the data validation here, because this is creating the drop-down list is using data validation. So I'm just going to get rid of that, and we're going to start from a new there. I'll go into data and go to data validation and just remove everything, right? Clear all. That's going to remove everything. Those are gone, right? So this is the table. So we're setting up our table, and then the second column here is going to be where our drop-down list is, right? So that's step 1. So step 2 is creating the item list, right? So you want to have that list of names where it's going to pull from. So the item list that I've created here is John, Gil, Suresh, Lily, and Yang. So that's my item list, right? So that's going to be where it's going to source it from. Now the third step is to figure out if the name has been used, right? So in this instance, what we need to do is we want to create a column here that lets us know if the name has been used in that drop-down. So this particular formula is going to tell us. So let's see what this particular set of formulas do. I will put the formula over here, so when I move out of it, you can still see the formula. So I'm going to type formula text, and it's just going to show the formula that's being referenced here. Press enter, and you'll see that that formula is referenced. I'm going to just copy that particular formula text down here, and it'll tell you as we change from the different cells if it changes or not, right? So the only thing that changes it is the reference A1 to 85 here. So let's take a look at this formula and see how it's working. So what it's doing, it's going to work from the inside out. And the first function that we see here is this COUNTIF function. So what COUNTIF does is it's going to look at that drop-down sheet here, cells B2 to B6, which is my name column here, and it's going to compare that to cell A1 here in this sheet. So A1 says John. So it's going to look down that list and say, does any of those ranges have John in it? If it does, count it. So of course, there is nothing here right now, so it's going to count 0. So 0 is not less than or equal to 1, so it's going to give me a blank. So it's going to use that blank it's going to go into this if function now. So let's say if this is true, then blank, otherwise false. That's what the if is doing. So this particular statement here, the COUNTIF, 0 is not greater than 1. That's going to be a false. So it's going to give me this particular function, this row function, which just tells me the row number. So row, open parentheses, close parentheses, tells you which row number something is in. So if I took something like this, row, if I did row and open close parentheses, it would tell me I'm in row 1, right? And if I pull this down to copy the formula, it's going to tell me I'm in row 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's what the row is doing. Let me bring in the formula evaluator to see how it's actually working, right? So if I click over here and bring in the formula evaluator, go to formulas, evaluate formula, we can see that if I evaluate the formula, the first thing it's going to do, you see that underline there, it's going to evaluate A1. It's going to look at the cell value in A1 and compare it to this range, right? For the count if. So it's looking at John, and now it's going to bring back the range for that. Is John within that range? And there is no John so in that range, so it counts as a 0. And of course 0 is not greater than or equal to 1. It brings it back to the if statement, and if it's false, it's going to bring the second argument, not this first argument. So if I click evaluate, it says false. It uses this row argument, this row function, and it's going to bring back the number 1, right? So the same thing's going to happen to here. This brings back to number 2. This brings back to number 3, 4, and 5, because it's going to bring back the row number, as I mentioned earlier, right? If I put John here, let's say I put John here. Now you're going to notice a change. It's going to be blank here, right? Because what happened, if I bring up the formula evaluator, is that it saw John within that range. And 1 is greater or equal to 1. It's going to bring back a blank now, not the row function. So if I click evaluate, it is true. It's going to bring back nothing, right? Because I had those double quotes. And that's what this particular set of functions does. You can see if I put Lily, it's going to remove the 4 there and make that blank. So if I put not John but Lily, you're going to see that that becomes blank. It doesn't have row 4 anymore, right? So this is what this set of functions is doing, right? So that is step 3. That particular set of functions or formula figures out if the name's been used. So what we'd have to do next is we need to create a list of unused names. And that's what this particular column does. This set of formulas. Let's bring this one in. Let's bring this one in. Formula text. Right, formula text. And let's click on cell C1, press enter, and copy the formula down. And this is a lot to take in, but as you can see here, what this particular column does, or this set of formulas do for this column, is it looks at the values here and sees that, oh, Lily's been used, and that's where you get a list of unused names. Sorry, you don't see Lily here in this particular column anymore. So this is what this set of functions does. If I bring in the evaluate formula, this is how it's going about it. So it's looking in row A1, which is right here in John, and it's going to bring back the row number, which is the number 1. Right, you see the number 1 there. Then it's going to evaluate this function, row A $1. And what that does is the $sign makes that a mixed cell reference. So when you copy formulas down, that 1 will always stay the same. The letter might be different, but the 1 stays the same. And you notice that this is important because you can see that as the formula goes down, as we copy the formula down in each of the rows, that stays the same, but this didn't have $signs in front of it. It changed, so it went from A1 to A2 to A3, but this stayed at A1. So it's going to be 1 minus row A1, and that's going to be 1 minus 1, which is 0, right? And that's going to become 0 plus 1 here. Let me evaluate that. So it's going to be 1, right? Because that 0 plus 1 is 1. So it's going to evaluate the next function now. The next function is going to count the entries from B1 to B5. So the entries in B1 to B5, you can see that right now it's going to count values that are in the cells. It's not going to count, it's just going to count any values that are in the cells. There are 4 values, 1, 2, 3, 4 right now, right? So it's going to count that. If I evaluate that, you can see that 4 show up now. So 1 is not greater than 4. So it's going to evaluate that as false, right? So it won't put a blank in there because the second argument is only evaluate if it's true. So evaluates false, it's going to go into this set of functions now. So you can see it's underlined here. So what it's going to do now, it's going to look at row A1, which of course is going to be the number 1. That's the first row. So it shows up as 1, and it's going to add 1 to it. So we have 2, and then we're going to minus row A1, which is 1 again, right? That's the first row. 2 minus 1 is 1. So that's where we have there. So now we're going to evaluate the small function. So the small function is going to take the smallest number out of a range. It has 2 arguments. First is the range, b1 to b5, which is this range here, b1 to b5. And this number 1 means it's going to take the first smallest number. If there's a 2 there, it's going to take the second smallest number, 3, etc., right? So it's going to take the first smallest number here in b1 to b5. And the first smallest number is the number 1, right? So evaluate that, and that's number 1. And now that's finished. We're going to use the index function now. What index function is a lookup. And it's going to look up from a range of A1, you see A1 to A5, A1 to A5, and it's going to bring back the first row. So John is in the first row. So it's going to bring back John, right? Or bring back the value in cell A1, which is going to be John. So if I click evaluate, it brings back John, right? That's what this whole formula is doing. Now, if I change it, if I put John instead of Lee, let's put John here. Now you're going to notice that it changes, right? So now John's gone, and it's going to bring back the other set of unused names, Gil, Suresh, Lily, and Yang, right? So this is where this part is going to show up in our dropdown. So this is where we've created a list of unused names. This long formula is what does it. It creates our list of unused names. All right, so now let's go to our last step here, where we create our dropdown. So in order to create our dropdown, what we need to do is we kind of need to reference this cell range. And what we can do is use an offset formula. So here I'm going to use the offset function, and the offset function is going to be something where I can create and then put into and define a name for it. So let's see what it can do. So I'm going to type offset, push tab. You know what? I'm going to use the insert function window to kind of bring it all into a view here. The offset function takes 5 arguments, and only 3 of them are required. So the reference is where are we going to start? So what it does is it returns a reference to a range, given number of rows and columns and height and width. So what does it mean? Well, we're going to start off at a reference point, and that's going to be C1 here. I'm going to make that a absolute cell reference. All right, and the rows is how many rows up and down do we want to go off of that reference? If I want to stay within cell C1, I'll type 0. Same for columns. How many columns do I want to reference off of to the left or right? And that's going to be 0. You notice that if I wanted to bring back the value of Suresh, I can just type 1. I want to go 1 row down, right? Click OK. It brings back Suresh, right? But we don't want that. We want to continue our formula. So we don't want to offset our reference. So that goes back to 0. But what we do want is we want the height that we have for our values here. And the height is going to be based off of how many values show up here. Because remember, this particular cell is going to tell us which are the unused names, right? There's 4 unused names. So we want to count the values in this column. So I'm going to use a function called count. And what I want to do is I want to count within this range, I want to count wherever there's a value. So right now there's going to be 4 values. It's going to bring back 4, right? And I'll put that as absolute cell reference. F4 here, press F4 here. That turns it into a absolute cell reference. It puts the dollar signs in front. The width, that's going to be, I just want 1 column width. I don't want 2 column widths or 3 column widths. I just want 1, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to bring back an error here, but that doesn't matter here. What I want to do is take that particular formula, Control C to copy, and create a name for that formula. Let's escape because I want to get out of edit mode here. I'm going to create a new name. Let's go define name. Let's just call this check name. And I'm going to put that formula in here. And what that formula is going to do, it's going to do is when I create the data validation, it's going to bring back this formula and execute it. So that's done. I'm going to go to the dropdown now, and now I'm going to create the dropdown list. Let's get rid of John here, delete that. Select my range of cells where the data validation is going to be. Go under data, go under data validation, and under allow, choose list. And for the name source, we'll call this check name. I think that's what I called it. Click OK, and now we have our dropdown. Right? The first dropdown, let's say we want it Suresh. We click Suresh here, and for the next dropdown, Suresh should be gone, and he is gone. And we have Gil, and there should be 3 names left: Yang, and Lily, and finally John. So it basically ran out now. So if I try to click on the dropdowns anywhere else, it's gone, right? So that's the way that we can create a drop-down list that doesn't show items that are already selected. So I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.